Family's all coming together this Thanksgiving, my mother said over the phone. It'll be just like old times. I believed her. That was my first mistake. I drove 4 hours from Sudbury to my parents' house in Barry on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. The kind of grey October drive where the trees are already half bare and the sky can't decide between rain and something worse. I'd taken 4 days off work. I told my supervisor at the accounting firm that I had a family commitment, which felt true at the time. I'd even stopped at a bakery in Aurelia and picked up a butter tart box because my grandmother loves them, always has, and I wanted to walk in with something warm in my hands. I pulled into the driveway at 2:30. My parents' car was gone. I told myself they'd just stepped out. Groceries, maybe. The big low blows by the highway get slammed the day before Thanksgiving. I let myself in with a spare key they'd always kept under the third flagstone, the one with the chip in the corner. And I set the butter tarts on the kitchen counter and stood there in the quiet. The house smelled the same as it always did, old wood and the faint trace of my mother's fabric softener. But it felt different in the way that empty houses always do, like the air itself is heavier when nobody's been breathing it. Then I saw the note on the kitchen table. It was written on the back of a hydro bill envelope, my mother's handwriting, the kind she uses when she's in a hurry and doesn't want to waste good paper. Sweetheart, your uncle and aunt invited us to their place in Muskoka. Last minute. Didn't want to wake you with a call. Grandma Bet is in her room. She's had a rough week. You know how she gets. Leftovers in the fridge. Back Sunday. Love, Mum. I read it twice. Then I put it back down on the table exactly where I'd found it, which is a thing I do when I'm trying to stay calm. Keep everything where it is. Don't throw anything. Don't cry in someone else's kitchen. My grandmother has lived with my parents for 3 years, ever since my grandfather died, and she sold the farmhouse outside of Elmvale that she'd lived in for 41 years. She's 78. She has arthritis in both hands, and her knees give her trouble on cold days, and she takes a blood pressure medication every morning at 8 o'clock that she sometimes forgets. She is not, by any reasonable definition, someone you leave alone over a holiday weekend. And they'd left her with me, without asking. I went to her room. I knocked twice and pushed open the door, and she was sitting up in bed with a library book open in her lap and her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, the way she does when she's actually watching the window instead of reading. "Oh," she said. "Vivienne, I didn't know you were coming. That hit me somewhere I wasn't prepared for. They didn't tell you either." She shook her head slowly, a small shake, the kind that means she's not surprised. "Your mother mentioned Thanksgiving plans," she said. I assumed she meant here. I sat on the edge of her bed. She had a glass of water on her nightstand, and a crossword she'd half finished, and a framed photo of my grandfather that she always travels with, even just moving between rooms. I looked at his face for a moment. Broad smile, plaid shirt, like he'd just come in from the field. And I thought about how much she must miss him, especially on long weekends. "Well," I said, "I guess it's just us then." She looked at me over the top of her glasses. "Are you terribly disappointed?" "No," I said, and I meant it. I want to be honest about something. I love my grandmother, but we had never really been close. Not in the way she was close to my brother, who used to spend whole summers at the farm and came back every August with a tan and a new skill, canning tomatoes, fixing fence posts, reading weather by cloud shape. I was the one who stayed home, who did summer school one year and a part-time job the next, who called on her birthday and showed up at Christmas and made polite conversation and left feeling like I'd visited a place I almost remembered. That Thanksgiving weekend changed everything I thought I knew about her, and about myself, and about what my family had been doing for years. She asked me to help her to the kitchen for dinner. Her knees were bad and she moved slowly with one hand on the hallway wall. I made us eggs and toast because the leftovers in the fridge were one sad dish of pasta and a container of something that had gone the colour of old winter. We sat at the kitchen table and she told me she'd been craving eggs, actually, and that my mother never made them anymore because of her cholesterol, so this felt like getting away with something. "We're very rebellious," I said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, not a polite one. She has a great laugh, my grandmother. It starts quiet and then surprises you. We ate slowly. She asked about my job and I told her the truth instead of the version I usually give, which is short and fine-sounding. I told her I liked the work, but that the firm I was at had a way of making me feel like being good at my job was less valuable than being good at making the partners feel important. She listened without interrupting, which almost nobody does. That's not new, she said when I finished. That's just the world being the world. She tapped her fork against the side of her plate. The question is whether you're learning something there. If yes, stay. If not, leave. I thought about that for the rest of the meal. The next morning, Thanksgiving morning, she was up before me. I found her in the kitchen at 7:20, already sitting with her tea, watching the bird feeders through the back window. The yard backs onto a small creek and there were chickadees going absolutely feral over the sunflower seeds. I made her toast and sat across from her and she said, without looking away from the window, "I want to tell you something about your grandfather." She told me that when my grandfather sold his HVAC business back in 2001, he got $1.8 million for it, which was a reasonable price for a small regional company that had been running for 22 years. He'd invested most of it through a financial advisor in Barrie, a careful and mostly boring portfolio of dividend stocks and bonds, the kind of thing that doesn't make people rich quickly but grow steadily over 20-plus years. She told me the current value was somewhere around $4.2 million. I put down my cup of tea. "We live simply," she said, like this was an obvious thing. "The farm was paid off. We grew a lot of what we ate. Your grandfather drove the same truck for 14 years. She smiled at the chickadees. "Money's not hard to keep if you don't make a habit of spending it." I didn't know what to say. I had never in my entire life thought of my grandparents as wealthy. They shopped at Canadian Tire sales and reused plastic bags, and my grandmother still darns her own socks, which I'd assumed was habit until right then. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She looked at me. "Because I'm 78 and my hands don't work right anymore, and I want someone in this family to know the truth about things." She picked up her tea. "And because you're the only one who showed up. I stayed for all 4 days. I want to be clear about that. I hadn't planned to, technically. I had a vague idea of driving back to Sudbury on Friday, having done my duty, but we fell into a rhythm, my grandmother and I didn't want to break it. On Thursday, she taught me her batter tart recipe, which is different from the ones I'd bought at the bakery in Aurelia, and, I have to admit, better. The secret is a splash of bourbon and not over-baking. She pulls them at the exact moment when the filling still trembles when you shake the pan. We listened to a CBC radio documentary about migratory birds while we baked, and she knew things about bird behaviour that I didn't know she knew, which kept happening all weekend. She'd been a bookkeeper before she married my grandfather. She'd grown up in Thunder Bay and moved south when she was 23 for work, and had never quite felt like she fully belonged in the South, which she said was a feeling you either make peace with or spend your life fighting. "Which did you do?" I asked. "Made peace," she said. "Eventually, after some fighting. On Friday morning she had a bad day. Her knees were very swollen and she couldn't manage the stairs easily, and I helped her to the armchair in the living room and got her heating pad and her library book and her crossword. She was frustrated with herself in the way that people her age sometimes get. The kind of frustration that isn't really about the knees, but about what the knees represent. I sat with her for a while and we didn't talk. Just watched the creek through the window, and I think that was the right thing to do because she seemed better by afternoon. She asked me to get a folder from the filing cabinet in her room. She had organised everything: her will, her bank and investment statements, her doctor's information, a letter she'd written to whoever would be handling her affairs, explaining exactly what she wanted and where everything was. She had even put sticky notes on certain documents in her handwriting. "I did this last spring," she said, "after I had a fall. Your mother was very worried at first, but then she seemed to move on. I read the will with her beside me, not because she asked me to, but because I could see she wanted to talk through it. She had made things straightforward. She wanted my parents to receive $150,000 each, her son and her daughter-in-law, my father and mother. She wanted my brother to receive $150,000. The rest, the investments, the remaining assets, went to a small number of charities and to me. You and I have never spent much time together, she said, watching my face. That changes things. Grandma, I'm not doing this to punish them, she said, clearly and carefully. I'm doing this because I want what I worked for to go somewhere it will be respected. She folded her hands in her lap. You're a bookkeeper's granddaughter. I trust you to be sensible about it. I didn't know what to say. I thought about telling her to reconsider. I thought about pointing out that my parents would be upset, that my brother would be confused. But she had clearly thought about this longer and more carefully than I ever could, and I didn't think it was my place to talk a 78-year-old woman out of her own clear-eyed decisions. Okay, I said. I hear you. She nodded once. Then she asked if we could have the butter tart leftovers with tea, and we did, and she fell asleep in the armchair around 3 in the afternoon, which she said she never does, but I suspect she does regularly. My parents arrived back Sunday evening. My mother came through the door first with a tote bag from a Muskoka gift shop, and a loose, holiday weekend energy that faded the moment she registered that I was standing in the kitchen with the dishes already done, and something in my face she didn't immediately understand. "Oh, Viv," she said, "you stayed the whole time?" "I did," I said. She glanced toward my grandmother's room. Was it okay? "It was fine," I said. "We managed." My father came in behind her, my brother right after, both of them with the easy looseness of people who had just had a very comfortable 4 days somewhere with a doc. My brother gave me a hug and said, "Didn't know you'd be here, sis," which told me everything I needed to know about how much thought he'd put into the arrangement. I left the next morning. My grandmother walked me to the door, which was slow and careful, and she held my hand for a moment before I went. "Call me on Tuesdays," she said. "I'm usually done with my crossword by 10. I drove back to Sudbury with the last of the butter tarts on the passenger seat and thought about my grandfather's truck, the one he drove for 14 years, and whether I had ever really understood what it meant to take care of something. We did call on Tuesdays, every Tuesday for the next 8 months, usually around 10:15 once I knew she'd finished her crossword. Sometimes we talked for 15 minutes, sometimes for almost an hour. She told me about the winter birds and what she'd been reading and whether the physiotherapist was actually helping her knees. I told her about the job and eventually about leaving the job and then about the new position at a smaller firm where I felt less like furniture. "Good," she said when I told her. "I told you to leave when you stopped learning." "You did," I said. "I just needed a year to catch up." She passed away on a Tuesday morning in late June, which was not, her palliative care nurse told me gently, an entirely uncommon thing, that people sometimes choose their moment. She had been declining for about 6 weeks. Her heart, primarily. She had been comfortable and at home, and my parents had arranged for home care support. I had driven down twice in those 6 weeks and sat with her in the armchair, and the last time I saw her she was watching the creek in the bird feeders, and she seemed genuinely at peace. I got a call from the estate lawyer's office about 2 weeks after the funeral. My parents and brother got their $150,000 each. The charity she had chosen, 2 of them focused on rural seniors programs, one a literacy organisation based in Thunder Bay, received their shares. The remainder of the estate, including the investment portfolio, which had continued to grow and now sat at approximately $4.6 million, came to me. My mother was quiet for a long time when the lawyer read it out. My father looked at the table. My brother said, I don't understand. And the lawyer explained, with the careful neutrality of someone who has done this many times, that the will was clear and had been properly witnessed and notarized in February of the previous year. My mother turned to me afterward in the parking lot. Not angry, exactly. Something harder to name than anger. "Did you know?" she asked. "She showed me the will that weekend," I said. "Thanksgiving, when you were in Muskoka." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She never said anything to us." "She told me," I said, "that she had made peace with the things she couldn't change, but that she didn't have to leave money to them." I don't tell this story to make my family look bad. I don't think they're bad people. I think they made choices that seemed small to them at the time. A last-minute trip, a note on an envelope, an assumption that things would be fine, and didn't consider what those choices look like from the other side. From my grandmother's armchair, watching the creek, I used some of the inheritance to buy a house, a small place just outside of Sudbury with a yard big enough for a garden. I put in a bird feeder in early spring, the good kind, the tube feeder with the sunflower seeds. I am learning to identify the birds that come. Chickadees mostly, but also nuthatches. A pair of mourning doves who seem to have made a decision about the spruce tree near the fence. I pull butter tarts at the exact moment the filling still trembles. And on Tuesday mornings, around 10:15, I make a cup of tea and sit by the window and think about what she would have said about whatever I happen to be dealing with that week. It's not the same as calling her. Nothing will be the same as calling her, but it's something I do. A small, undeliberate thing, and I think she would have approved of that, of making a quiet habit out of remembering someone well.